Welcome back to Now Your Average CEO Lifeline. Today, we are talking about crafting company culture for resistance. Company culture is definitely something that's a hot topic. Just in general, with virtual companies, with in person companies, it can be difficult to understand your culture, know how to change your culture, or what your employees are looking for in your company culture. So, today we're going to hear from special guest Chuck Moller. Chuck was with us episode 22 on season one. He is experienced in being a leader and what that means as far as company culture. But I think a lot of our listeners have fear surrounding company culture. And is it something that projects your mission, your vision? So, Danielle, do you want to talk a little bit about what you think as a CEO company culture means to you or other leaders?
Certainly. So I think in our company, especially having been a remote company for the past nearly 2 decades, the important thing for me has been to not think of company culture as just something to check off on a box. So, for example, okay, we offer retirement benefits, check, good company culture, check. It hasn't been like that. I think it's something that's an ongoing narrative between myself and you as the COO. It's something that we talk about constantly. We're constantly evolving it, constantly shaping it. We ask for a lot of feedback really frequently from our supervisors, so our other people that are in management. And I think it really has to influence everything that you do on a daily basis. It can't just be a one time conversation.
I agree. And it means something different to CEOs or executives than it does to the employees, too, right? We're trying to shape it into what we think, not necessarily all these check boxes, but employees might think, well, I want company culture that has great benefits, that has flexibility, right? They have a checkbox. I think meeting in the middle is what triggers resilience. So I looking forward to what Chuck has to say about being this agile leader and how it will transform your company culture. I don't think it's easy to assess what your company culture is right now, right? How do you know what your company culture is? Do you ask your employees? I know we do. Do you think that other companies do the same, that they send out 360 feedback surveys or ask their employees what they're looking for? What do you get the
I
feel
think
from
it's
other
probably
companies?
not as common. That's something that we do internally, and it's something that we've put in our book that's coming out shortly. But I think if you look at company culture, not just how you're functioning internally with your employee, but also how it can impact how you look externally. So to your clients, sort of like a brand ambassador, and how it communicates the type of organization that you are, your core values, how it communicates all that to the outside world. So your vendors, your prospective clients, potential employees, all of that. And so I think also thinking of it more holistically is important. I think that's something that we do, and I think it's something we learned to do over time. It's not something that we did 16 years ago when we started, and I think that's where a lot of companies are as well.
You have to be flexible and adaptable. It can't be the same. If you're stagnant, you're gonna fall behind, right? Some 10 years ago, employees wanted something different. Your mission and should still be the same and it should align the same, but I think you have to be very adaptable when it comes to company culture and what your employees are looking for to make it in the long run.
Yes, I'm looking forward to talking to Chuck again about this. I think he's going to have a lot of great insights for us.
Me too. Hi, Chuck. Thanks again for joining us. We're really excited to have you back. Today, we're going to talk about company culture. And can you tell our listeners, our CEOs, our leaders, how they can start to assess their current company culture?
Yeah, so great topic. We'll try and get as much of it as we can covered in our time together. So culture to me is probably, one of the most critical aspects of your business. There's obviously strategy, there's your market, there's your overall mission and purpose of who you are, what you do, but ultimately what ties it all together, including your brand, is your culture. So there are a couple of really key if you want to call it measurement or qualitative factors that can really help assess culture. One would be, clearly turnover, not just overall turnover, but turnover of your top talent. Employee engagement surveys will give you or employee satisfaction surveys, depending what you like to use. Pulse surveys will give you an indication really of where, people are. Frankly, overall performance, financial performance is an indication of how healthy your culture is. So there's many, many factors that go into essentially saying, how healthy a culture. And frankly, the question really is, have you defined your culture, or have you modified or updated your culture from maybe what you initially put together when you first started your business?
So, what steps can we take to alter our company culture, right? If we had it one thing when we started and now it's just not working and I've done my assessments, what can we do to now change it in the direction that we are looking for it to go to follow our mission or vision?
Yeah. So culture essentially should be captured in a very articulate way. You should be able to describe your culture, which should frankly mirror, the purpose of you as a business. So when you think about not just your purpose and your strategy and why you're in business, but that should really be described in terms of the characteristics, essentially of why do people buy your products and services, which also translates into why do your employees want to work here? What's the overall experience going to be? And what's the driver of your culture is leadership. How do managers, especially the C-suite and the CEO, how are they showing up every day and representing and driving your culture? So first you got to define what your culture is. Or if you haven't defined in quite some time, or if your culture statements are sitting in boardrooms and cafeterias and conference rooms, and they're collecting dust, because they're not being lived every day, then it's time to really sort of, refresh and your culture. So first, you need a clear definition of what you mean by culture, what it is. That's really, really critical. And then second, you need to have specific behaviors defined that demonstrate that culture. And your culture is essentially what your values are. What do we value? What do we value as a business? What do we value in terms, again, that employee experience, that customer experience? So your values essentially describe your culture, and the behaviors demonstrate those values. So you've got to go through an exercise of defining those things very, very clearly, Nicole.
That's really great, Chuck. I'm so glad to see you again, and glad that you're joining us again. We have a question just about something that mentioned a few moments ago. We talked a little bit in our intro about 360 reviews and how that can impact a company culture. It's something that we do internally in our business, and I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that and other steps that leaders can take to alter their company culture for the better.
Yeah, no, it's a great example, Danielle. Yes, and it's good to see you again too. So a 360 is one of many essentially tools and practices that have to be sort of tied into your definition of your culture, your values, and those behaviors. So for example, if you're going to do 360s on any employee, including managers, those 360s should be reflective of the values of your culture, right? So those values should be then, and behaviors should be reflected in how every employee shows up, how every employee interacts with each other, how every employee acts in the marketplace. And that's captured in your 360s. That's an example of a tool, a tool. So essentially all your HR tools and processes should be reflected in how you live your culture, because that's what it really ultimately boils down to. If you don't walk the talk, essentially of how you demonstrate. So I'll give you a very specific example. You can articulate and pontificate your culture and your values and your behaviors every day if you wanted to. But if a CEO or for an executive or anyone in an organization, a superstar employee, starts demonstrating the wrong behaviors or treating people badly or doing something that's not reflective of what the culture you're trying to be or become, um, then people don't start believing it. They just think it's just talk. So it's really critical that your HR systems and processes, including tools like 360 assessments, and again, 360 is a development tool, right? So it's a 360, for those in your audience who are not familiar with it, it's meant to give you feedback from your key stakeholders, right? Your boss, your peers, your subordinates, or other key people in the organization. So you have a sense of how you're perceived as an employee at any level. And then you're also assessing yourself. So you get to compare how you see yourself or how others see you. So it's a combination of self-awareness and then using that feedback to develop yourself so you can be more effective, especially if there's some constructive feedback where you can improve. So the key is tools like this are meant to be feedback and development tools. And all your HR systems and tools should be designed to do that, including, by the way, how you promote, how you develop. So, for example, again, if you're promoting people, they're not demonstrating those values and not demonstrating those right behaviors, your culture, then again, the employee population is going to say, well, this is all talk. We don't really mean what we mean by culture. So that's why your systems have to support consistently how you reinforce and frankly live your culture.
I
That
have
is
a
really helpful advice.
it is. I have an example, Chuck, that I'm hoping you can shine some light on. Uh, to play devil's advocate, our
Yeah.
average entrepreneur decides they're going to do a 360 or they're going to do some type of survey or review, and they're expecting one thing and the results come back and it's 50-50, right? Half of the results is exactly what they're looking for. It is exactly what they thought, and the other half is the complete opposite. And now they're torn, right? What advice would you give this entrepreneur CEO that's looking at a complete 50-50 split from what they're looking for versus the complete opposite?
So just give me the context, 50-50 split for what? What are they, what's the,
It aligns with what they're looking for. The wonderful half is, they're saying they're engaged, they love the benefits, they love working with the customers, and the other half doesn't like the way the CEO operates. They think that there's a lack of communication. They don't like the benefits, right? It's a complete polar opposite of having what the CEO would consider great company culture versus terrible culture. And now what do they do that they feel so split?
yeah. Great question. So best practice, that's going to happen, by the way, when you do an employee engagement survey, if you do group discussions or focus group discussions or whatever the tools you're using to get feedback. It's all about getting feedback. And there are going to be at times inconsistencies. Some of that inconsistency could be about the manager of that particular department or function, or maybe they need to improve their communication. They need to improve their engagement or their involvement of their employees. So you're going to see inconsistencies no matter how big or small you are as a business, because often it has to do, does that manager have the tools and the skills to be effective to represent consistently across the organization what we mean by culture when it comes to communication, feedback, development opportunities, compensation, consistency, opportunities, promotion, development, all the things that are important to an employee, right? So a lot of especially new managers or mid-level managers, maybe have never been held accountable to, hey, these are my expectations of you of how we're going to manage, how we're going to develop, and how we're going to give feedback to your employees. How are you going to be a mentor? A lot of managers today and a lot of businesses spend most of their time as an individual contributor. They're not really spending enough time managing and developing their people and giving them feedback. So it's not as simple as that, hey, I got half the population or one group saying everything's great, another group saying, hey, the exact opposite. You have to kind of look at your individual managers and departments to see why the inconsistency. And frankly, that's one piece of it. The other piece of it, Nicole, is frankly, when you're getting overall feedback, and maybe it's not as simple, and it's usually, by the way, it's a combination of, yes, you have some inconsistency across your managers, but maybe there is an opportunity as an organization holistically to say, what are the top 2 or 3 things we got from feedback we received, and how are we going to address it? So from a transparency standpoint, best practices says, as a CEO, you want to go back to your employees and say, here's the feedback we received. Here's what you're telling we're doing well. We should continue to do that, and we will. And by the way, here are the top 2 or 3 things we got in terms of opportunities where we can be more effective. And here's what we're going to be doing about that over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, or however long you need. So that transparency, we're hearing you, and we're going to do something about is really, really critical. The worst thing you could do, no matter what the vehicle is ask your employees for feedback and input, and then don't do anything with it. Because they're
Of course.
right, because they're not going to do it again. And if they're going to do it again, they're going to be pretty skeptical. So trust, transparency, and what you can and can't do, and being honest about that. It's also really, really critical in that dialogue. Because let's face it, sometimes we have employees, and we can be one of those employees ourselves, where maybe our expectations are not that realistic, or simply as a company, they don't see that as one of the top initiatives or imperatives that we have to as an organization. So sometimes culture fit is also critical because what you as an employee may value may not be as important for that organization. So even in the hiring process as a company, when you've got clarity on this is our culture, this is what we value, and this is why we have that dialogue. And does this fit what let me understand what your values are, and is this going to be a good value fit, not just a good role fit? So that's when we talk about people don't leave because of role fit. People leave because culture fit, no matter how good or bad of an employee they are. So that's so you have to really think about everything from how you hire to onboard to how you develop and manage and nurture your employees throughout the whole life cycle of employee culture has to be embedded.
Oh,
I always
that's really, oh, sorry, Nicole, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna say, working in HR for so long, during the hiring process, it is always this has to be both a role fit and a culture fit for you as much as it has to be for us. And that expectation, setting it right off the bat, I think is key um, to resilience in your culture and retaining your employees. But sorry, Danielle, I cut you off.
Well, that's okay. I was just going to say, I think that's really interesting how you said that employees can sometimes leave because it's a bad culture fit or not the right culture fit. So I'm wondering, as an employer, what milestones should employers be striving for to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Well, that's a really fair question. I think, it really does come down to clarity on what those expectations are, in your role. And frankly, what you expect that person to be doing on a day-by-day basis in terms of responsibilities and key deliverables. Now, when I say day to day, I'm not inferring micromanaging, right? Because nobody wants to be micromanaged, especially if you're talking about established, experienced people. But I think the clarity of that and the constant what I call recalibration of that, because the world we live in today is very, very different, right? I mean, those expectations, those responsibilities can be modified and changed on a constant basis. We don't live in a world where things are pretty consistent anymore. A lot of things can change. The market changes, the competition changes, products and service are constantly being modified. So we live in a very innovative and fast-moving world. So it's really important to make sure that clarity of role, of responsibilities, and expectations and deliverables are constantly happening, and not just for the individual, but for the teams. So when that kind of engagement, that communication, that kind of clarity on deliverables and expectations, and again, expectations not just on results and deliverables, but again, how you expect people to get things done, going back to culture and behavior. So that kind of interaction, Danielle, is really, really critical.
I agree, Chuck. We talk about internally with Virtual Assist USA. I A lot of our supervisors or employees that have been with us for a while, they tend to get annoyed when we repeat things, right? Oh, 6 months ago we talked about this. Let's talk about it again. I've come to tell them that just, I know you may know this, but we have new team members and sometimes our employees may forget, and just to remind them to set that tone and that expectation on a regular basis. How do you handle employees that don't want to be micromanaged or reminded about things? What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, again, everyone's really wired differently. If you go back to kind of behavior and we use behavioral assessments in our business, and we all have different personalities. We have different styles. Some of us are very, very independent, want to be kind of left alone. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes not. We could talk about that. And some people really need to be involved and feel like getting feedback on a constant basis, maybe too much actually. And everyone's in between, right? So we all have different styles and personalities when it comes to this. And then again, going back to what I said earlier, some managers happen to be very hands-on and some managers have to be very hands-off. So adaptability, we always talk about adaptability, and especially during COVID and post-COVID. But as a manager, your ability to understand your people and what their style is, and frankly, what they need, and how do you adjust your style? So, for example, if you're a very hands-on manager by nature, but you're working with highly independent people, As long as you're aligned on expectations, deliverables, responsibilities, and progress, and there's communication vehicles in place, manage them that way. If you also happen to be a hands-off manager, but you've got an employee or a group that really needs a lot of hand-holding, well, again, you need to adjust your style as a manager. It's really managers that have to do the most of adjustment, right? They need to understand their people, what the gaps are in terms of skills and capabilities, make sure there is clarity and alignment. Okay, that we are on the same page and why I'm going to be involved when I need to, and so on. So again, managing people is very complex, and as a manager, you've got to dedicate enough time to make sure there's clarity on not only expectations and capability, and that we're on the same page in terms of why I'm going to be involved and why I'm not going to be involved, but also adjust to the needs and styles of your employees. But again, if some of your employees are over rotating on either independence or being too needy, again, that's got to be part of the dialogue, right? So they have to at times make some adjustments as well. But paying attention to that is really, really important.
Thank you for expanding on it. I know it can be difficult to be a manager with multiple behavioral styles, that fall within your team. What do you think makes the difference between a good leader and a great leader?
Boy, that's how much time do we have?
I know. I know it's a rather
All right.
loaded question,
I know
but
we.
the short what is the top if you had to say there was one attribute, what would it be?
No, it's a fair question, and we listen. We live in the world of sound bites today, anyway, right? I think there's. I'm going to give you. I'm not sure I can give you one simple, but I'll give you my quick formula, and it is quick. I would say that really the critical thing of a leader is when they have to care, and I mean that sincerely. A lot of leaders get promoted into leadership roles because they want the responsibility, they want the clout, they want the prestige, they want the income. They don't necessarily mind managing people, but they really want to manage the business. But you ultimately have to care about people, and you got to care about their success. And that to me is the critical ingredient. If you truly care about the success of your people, and if you help your people be successful, you will be successful. That's the biggest shift from going from an individual contributor, especially to management, especially senior management. It's got to be about your people. And your people know if you care or not. They just do. And if you demonstrate you care about them as individuals, as professionals, and you demonstrate in how you interact with them and treat them on a day-to-day basis, that to me is the most critical piece of it. So you got to start there.
I couldn't align with you more, Chuck. The first thing I ask our employees when they come on board is, what does success look like in this role for you? And not necessarily just what does success look like as far as skill sets or maybe developing your professional career, but what does it look like outside of it? How does it affect your personal life? And what does success look like? And sometimes it's just flexibility. Sometimes it is, I want to learn to be a supervisor or a leader. So I very much align with you on that.
Good. Well, I agree. So I mean, again, there's more to it, but that to me is you got to start there. That's the most important ingredient.
Our last question, as always, is what advice do you have to our listeners to not be your average CEO when it comes to your company culture?
Well, I think as I've tried to articulate, there is a framework. It's not just some nice in the sky, conceptual thing to do. There actually is a framework and a process and a system that you can actually create. And I don't care how small or big you are. Actually, some of the best cultures are entrepreneurial, pre-IPO, emerging growth companies, right, that are moving 150 miles an hour. So it's really not about whether you're family owned, you're private, you're public, where you are in your business cycle, how small and big you are. You can create culture from day one. And yes, as a CEO, you are the captain and owner of your culture. It's not an HR thing. It's not for everybody else. You've got to own it. You've got to drive it, and you've got to pay attention to it every day and every week. So that's my biggest advice: is making sure that you sit down and reflect on, hey, do I have a culture? Have I defined my culture? Do I have systems and tools and a framework that allows us to live our culture? And then, it's very simple. If you start asking your employees at all levels, what's our culture? Can they answer that? Can they articulate that? And again, your culture is reflective not just your internal brand, which is what your employees are going to say, but your external brand. So think about the business aspects of aligning that. And by the way, a healthy culture means a strongly engaged workforce, which empirical evidence through lots of research the last 20 or 30 years show that the higher engaged your workforce is through a healthy, strong culture, the stronger financial performance. So there's truly a financial piece to this that as a CEO, you should be paying attention to.
Thank you so much, Chuck. We will have in the show
Pleasure.
notes where they can find more from you, but can you tell them where they can find more from you just vocally?
Sure. I mean, best place is you can always look me up on LinkedIn. It's Chuck Mollor, Mollor. You can always look us up at our website, MCG Partners, which is mcgpartners.com.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you back on our podcast, and I hope you'll join us next season on a different topic surrounding leadership.
I would love to do it. Thanks for having me, Nicole and Daniela.
Thank you.
Thank you.